Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's great to see you on January the 30th, 2025, the year of our Lord. And it is an honor and a privilege to be your host on Leaders on the Frontier. We talk on the frontier about a lot of policy. Well, today we're going to talk about action by citizens. And so don't miss this program. I think it's a very meaningful take on how do we, as citizens, assess and thoughtfully think not only about policy, public policy that is, but how do we act it out? So we're going to get to that in a moment. And so in the meantime, I'm very glad to see everybody hopping on board here. Good afternoon, Prairie. We have just so many um, great people who participate in this program now. I think last week we had just terrific dozens and dozens of comments from people. So we're really grateful for that. And so think about the topic at hand as we dive into this very important area of citizen action. In the meantime, I did want to just highlight a few news items as people join us. You may have heard there is a new administration in town, so to speak, in the United States of America. And as they lay down their series of executive orders from the presidency of Donald Trump, his pen is rather busy. There's certainly been a lot of missives sent out about concerns about a possible 25% increase in tariffs from a number of countries, including Canada. And the date is just around the corner, specifically February 1. So, what is your sense of the odds of those tariffs being implemented? This is a serious matter as we look at the future health of our economy, the lives of our people, businesses. So this is a big deal. So it's rather amazing. I was just saying to a colleague, I don't think I've ever seen in recent memory um, so many people scurrying around, whether it's the prime minister, cabinet, federally, and those right across the provinces, the premiers, trying to talk about what should the response be? Should it be kind of a tit for tat? How do we think thoughtfully about dealing with those kinds of challenges? And are we prepared as a nation for a kind of a tariff war? And I think the short answer is, from my perspective at least, I'm curious what you think, is no, we're not. So I'm seeing people come on. I see Matt Lane, among others. So welcome again. And again, we appreciate your comments. Now, it's interesting. You may have heard that yesterday, the Bank of Canada cut its interest rate by a quarter point, or a quarter, 25 basis points to be precise, a quarter of a percentage. So that brings our bank rate down. And it's interesting. You may have noticed that the governor of the bank said to the effect that a trade war with the United States will, quote, badly hurt Canadian jobs, investment, and growth. This is from Bank of Governor Tiff Macklin said yesterday. Macklin told reporters that the bank was powerless to help. Well, is that really true? We produce and earn less than without tariffs, said Macklin. Monetary policy cannot offset this. So that's part of the actions in play. Obviously, Canada has kind of an anemic economy, and so this is a very important issue. There's a question here from Donna, by the way, who says, is the federal government pulling their plan in action or just talking about it? Daniel Smith has the right idea and plan. She's the only adult in the room. We can't afford these tariffs. Okay. So thank you very much, Donna, for that point. It's also another point is made by Breakpoint Communities, pardon me, fix the border issues, no tariffs. Yeah, so there's a whole series of issues, and it behooves Canada to get on board with, I think, fixing those irritants that we can. Border security is definitely one of them, and I think there's been some action. It's hard to assess whether that's really significant or not when you lease, what is it, 2 Black Hawk helicopters as part of your plan. But the point is that the United States cares about security. It's a very top priority issue is to decrease fentanyl deaths. And sadly, Canada is producing fentanyl in various quarters. I know that the Vancouver area is a super hub of fentanyl production. So let's get on that, folks. And that shouldn't just care. We shouldn't just care about that because the new president cares, but because we as Canadians should care, surely, about that issue. So stay tuned on that issue of tariffs. That continues to roll through the country. And let's see it perhaps as an opportunity to get our policy house in order and strengthen our country. Where's Wendy? Says Canada's leaders are stubborn, egotistical, and dangerous. We will deservedly get spanked by the United States. Well, let's see, Wendy. Let's hope you're wrong. And then finally, Donna says, we care about our borders, but Trudeau doesn't. Okay, well, so there seems to be, certainly from this audience, from what I'm hearing, a lot of recognition that maybe we could do better. We can do better when it comes to our border, among other issues. So, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. Surely, we should get our policy house in order. What does that mean? Let's stop the war on Canadian energy, for one. Let's free up regulations. Let's get business moving again. And by golly, let's have trade between our provinces. I mean, this is absurd, isn't it? This is common sense. In other news, I want to highlight the Hope Commission. Briefly, you may have heard that the Hope Commission Justice was heading up a commission into the whole issue of concerns regarding foreign interference in our democratic institutions. And that report just came out. I had the pleasure of reading that last night. I encourage you to look at it. And it's got a lot of very important information that we would do well to not miss the point. There is foreign interference. But the headline that's been mentioned is that there's, quote, no evidence of traitors per se. But there is evidence. She did confirm many things that we can do, again, a much better job. And she did confirm there is a, quote, incomplete picture of these activities of foreign influence because of the way intelligence agencies gather information. Specifically, they monitor foreign actors, but they don't monitor, the lawmakers. So in this case, we need to take a critical eye to that report, so stay tuned to that information. So we've got an Ontario election in the offing as Premier Doug Ford tries to get a new mandate and, of course, is running against Donald Trump now. Tell me what you think. But in the meantime, we've got other comments. Put our military on the border and deport illegals. So yeah, concerns about immigration too. How do we manage that important file, that policy area? And MJ Daggart says, this is all stuff we should have been doing all along. It's common sense. Amen to that. So as we get on with the program today, I am really quite honored to introduce certainly one of my heroes. And I don't say this lightly because, it's one thing to talk about public policy, and that is important, the point of healthy discussion. But it's another level when people dare to enter the arena. I remember well biographies of so many political leaders, including, I think it was Teddy Roosevelt, who said, it is one thing to criticize, it's another thing, I'm paraphrasing, to enter the forum, to get one's nose bloody, to be able to actually, as a citizen, exercise leadership. So we're going to talk about citizen leadership, and I want to welcome the founder of the ICLEI Initiative, and that's Maggie Hope Braun. Welcome, Maggie.
Thank you for having me. What an introduction and a quote to give. I haven't heard that one, so thank you for sharing.
Well, I'll never forget it. As someone who's had the pleasure of being involved in different arenas, including as an elected official, I really respect what you're doing, Maggie Hope Braun. And Maggie, you've got such a great story. We met each other back in June in a small town in Manitoba called Beausejour, and it was organized brilliantly by our friends, fellow citizens, called Manitoba Stronger Together. and it's quite an organization. Be sure to look at their website. And there's a variety of speakers. I was one of them with yourself, Maggie, and it was a real pleasure to, just listen to your story and say, wow, that's inspiring. So I really like it that you have chosen, you have answered the call, if you will, as a citizen out of genuine, thoughtful concern. You see, believe it or not, globalist kinds of policies, and you're choosing to act locally. I think that's the headline, isn't it, Maggie?
It is. Yeah, we've identified the global agenda as citizens. We know that we've signed on to United Nations Agenda 21. We know we've signed on to the Paris Agreement, but for so long it felt like there was nothing we could do about it. And the more
Mm,
that we look into how those agendas are being implemented, we find it's being done at the local level voluntarily. And we as Canadian citizens have a lot that we can do in between
mm.
voting and speaking out against these things through rallies. There's more that we can do in the civic engagement arena than just vote and rally against. There's many professional ways that we can approach it.
Yeah, so it is really exciting. And so I realize that hope is in your name, but you offer hope.
Thank you.
And what I like is that you are looking at these issues because it's so easy to look at these pictures of Klaus Schwab. He's kind of almost a symbol of this globalist movement that meets in Davos. In fact, it was just last week that Davos leaders were meeting. And it's interesting. There he's with the World Economic Forum. There as he's steepling up his hands, his fingers, and so he symbolizes an effort to exercise a certain type of policy that really doesn't respect your voice in a way. And I'm kind of oversimplifying it. And honestly, I've been someone who's supported international cooperation for years, but
Mhm,
that's one thing. This is
mhm,
another thing, isn't it? It's globalism on steroids, where people kind of bigger is better, but in the process at the national level, let
mhm.
alone at the provincial local level, it's like the citizens' voice is being diminished. Am I simplifying this too much, Maggie, or is that why you've gotten involved here?
Yeah, they're very loud. They talk a lot about their policies, and I think it scares people because we don't know how it's being implemented. We don't know how this top-down program is getting into our provinces and our municipalities. And so, what we're doing with ICLEI is we're showing exactly how and what organizations are being used to partner with our municipalities and bringing in, we're getting loud too. We're bringing our words, we're bringing our local agenda back into local councils and pointing
Hmm.
out the origins of the programs that they've adopted and the negative impacts, that it's not all good. It's, it might sound good on the surface to bring in sustainable development, but when we look into that, even that, sustainable development and local environmental stewardship are two completely different things. One is removing the people off the land and into high density housing into the cities, and it's a very urban agenda, whereas environmental stewardship would have us on the land, taking care of the land, overseeing the land, having our property rights intact so we could use the land for what it was traditionally used for when we buy property in a rural area or small town or anywhere. So we're providing now information for our elected representatives. And that's what the international lobbyists have been doing for quite some time, the last 30 years, putting in front of our local councils reports and recommendations. And we didn't know that this was going on, at least in the mass number that we do now, that we can make a difference. And we're starting to use our skills and background and training and pulling all that together so that we can put forward reports and recommendations and send citizens in that have some training with Toastmasters and just deliver this information in a reasonable way and help our councils to turn turn their agenda back to a local agenda.
Wow. So this is truly big agenda. Because, I think some of this is frankly confusing for a
Mm-hmm.
lot of us in the sense that we hear, frankly, a lot of nice words like sustainability and the environment. Like, Maggie, surely you aren't against the environment. I know that part of your training and background was, well, let's lay it up here a bit. So
Yeah.
KICLEI, that's the initiative. And I love what it stands for. Tell us what it stands for and how you founded it.
So we identified an organization that the United Nations founded in 1990, and its acronym is ICLEI, the International Council on Local Environmental Initiatives. And when we look at that organization, we find that they have partnered with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and similar organizations all across the world, and are bringing forward programs that are in line with the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And on the surface, those do look good. Absolutely. And so when we started talking about ICLEI in local council meetings, we discovered that most local councillors and the general population had no idea who ICLEI was. We all knew about the WEF and the World Bank and these big organizations, but we didn't realize that ICLEI was an organization with a lot of influence. So we founded KICLEI, and that stands for Kicking the International Council Out of Local Environmental Initiatives. And really, we're having a lot of fun with that because we're getting results for the first time, it feels. So,
wow. So
yeah.
you are standing up to the devil's crowd.
Mm-hmm.
You're acting locally. You're
Yeah.
thinking ironically globally, and
Mm-hmm.
you're acting locally in a different way than they
Yeah.
are. And your point is that you're advocating for policy instead of disempowering the
Mm-hmm.
citizen and undermining their standard of living, undermining their voice. You're trying to empower them. And that's, we would argue, obviously at Frontier, that's a very important principle of good public policy. And and not to diverge too much, but you
Mm-hmm.
want to get power to the local level, to
Yep.
the citizen as much as possible. Surely this is a primary principle, but they're coming at it from another angle, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And I love what you're doing with the Frontier Center and policy research, because that's exactly what we need right now. We need an army of people presenting alternative policies to our local and higher up governments, and showing that, we've put some thought into this too. And as we should, we're a developed nation. Traditionally, we funded the United Nations to deliver programs to undeveloped nations. And really, why is it that the United Nations is turning so much attention to developed nations and telling us how to implement local environmental programs? We are the environmentalists of the world. We are the example. And our local communities and leaders here can come up with much better programs than the programs that we're finding are presented by ICLEI and their organizations, which are basically data collection programs that are marketing strategies for corporate interests, it seems. So we can get into what their recommendations are and their strategies, but it's a lot of data collection, and they're tricking our councils into adopting programs. And we're there to help our councils recognize this and adopt local strategies instead.
Okay. So, man, yeah, that's a very interesting word. They're tricking us. So there's a number of very good comments here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a breakpoint community says we get pushback from local councillors when we try to expose the, what is that, GCM?
Global Covenant of Mayors, I believe.
Okay, yeah. So most people don't have the mental capacity, question mark. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, part of this is it is complex, but essentially the globalists, and not all global initiatives are bad. You can't generalize, but you do have a lot of global initiatives that we're on your page, Maggie, we're on each other's page, are really undermining people's prosperity and their control over their lives in terms of how they're going to live. I mean, this has gone bonkers.
Yeah.
And so you've got other comments here. I'm going to go up to the top a little bit here. Breakpoint Committee says also, how do we remove, what does it say here? How do we remove this overarching influence? Democracy is diminishing. Federation of Canadian Municipalities is lockstep with these foreign bodies. Now, I want to tell you something. I was quite involved years ago with the Canadian Federation of Canadian Municipalities,
Mm.
and this was an important group. It's kind of an
Mhm.
institution that's been around
Mhm.
for probably 100 years, where people would meet across the country, network, and share best practices and learn from each other about the core business of running a good local government
Yeah.
and all that goes with it. So, are you saying that dear organization has kind of gone sideways? It's like one of these many institutions in our great country that has been infected by kind of this, ideology that's gone overboard. Is that what you're alluding to here, Meg?
Yeah, and you're right. It was a prestigious organization. It had a noble cause, and even now, we talk to counselors who recognize that the programs being offered are not in line with what their community needs, and would like to withdraw, but they're on the fence because they need to be
Mhm.
able to network with representatives from other local governance. The the FCM really took a turn in the 1990s. That's when ICLEI was established, and
Mhm.
the FCM participated in a committee by the United Nations called PrepCom. And it was in that committee that they worked with organizations like ICLEI to draft the documents that were agreed to and signed in Rio de Janeiro. So we have
Mhm.
now the FCM working to draft Agenda 21. And once that was signed, we see the partnership between FCM and ICLEI and the federal government, instead of providing programs that are um, as created at the local level and then asking for funding from the federal government to come down for those local level programs. We see that all the programs laid out on the FCM website are all international programs that are being downloaded to the local level. So there's an issue there. It was on their website. It says they're the voice um, for local governments to advocate at the federal level. But what we see now is it's an international voice to local government instead of a local voice to federal government. It's a complete flip. And we're seeing local councils, especially in rural counties, start to withdraw from the organization and stating that they recognize the FCM is no longer offering programs to their benefit. So I don't know if we have the right slide for that one, but we could put that one down and share it after. But the County of Wheatland, Alberta, was the first in November to publish their letter withdrawing from the FCM and
Wow.
calling rural councils all across the country to do the same and take a unified stance in recognizing that the FCM is no longer an institution that is advocating for rural communities.
Wow.
When you look at sustainable development, and we talked a little earlier about it and the difference between that and environmental stewardship, but sustainable development was brought in with certain United Nations land use policies.
Mhm.
And the entire development scheme is based on reducing population growth in small towns and rural communities and driving population to urban areas for urban densification. So that way we're not using so much energy and the land is left and saved for future generations. And they use language that sounds really good, but at the end of
Mm.
the day, it's been 30 years and we've seen our small towns get downgraded, our
Mhm.
industries bought up by foreign investors and closed in the small towns. We've seen our mom and pop stores replaced by franchises. And it's all this complete communities in line with global investors, and it's killing our communities. So I'm so happy to see councils taking that step. And we've put together packages on ICLEI's website. So people across Canada can share that example and those letters from Stettler and Wheatland County with their rural councillors and give them a template to withdraw as well. Sometimes I think the councils just need a little bit of a nudge because they already know that they should do this anyway. And what we'll find there is new organizations will be formed to replace the FCM. And there's a lot that will happen with this work.
Interesting. Yeah. So there's a lot going on here. If you've just joined us, I'm talking with the great Maggie Hope Braun. She's the founder of ICLEI Initiative, kicking international councils out of local environmental initiatives. And I tell you, Maggie is one of my heroes, and I hope she is yours. I'm sure you're gathering that as she dares to gather hands with other concerned citizens right across our country. And we're going to dive into some of these examples. And, so if you're watching this, please like it, share it. I mean, this is an important issue because you've got arguably, and I don't want to sound overly histrionic, but we've got this global group of people, Klaus Schwab and company, who are intent on major agenda of control. And you can argue, well, some of this agenda is good. Like, how can you argue about cleaning up your environment? But is it thoughtful policy, or is it just, pardon my language, but shoving ideology up our noses that isn't grounded in reality or evidence? I mean, this is really a problem. So this is, we're getting a lot of comments here. Maggie, go girl. Thank you so much. Very brave. Very nice. Thank you so much. And I can't begin to list off all your acronyms. So thank you, whoever that is who gave that comment. We have an opportunity, a duty as citizens to pay attention. So that's what you and your team are doing, Maggie Hope Braun, is taking a critical eye at this. And it's so amazing you mentioned back in the 90s, because I do remember watching this very closely as our then Prime Minister Brian Mulroney attended. I think it was the first real Earth Summit in Brazil. And you had the tabling of also, what was it, the Har Grønland report, the former Prime Minister of Norway, as I recall. And I remember reading that report, and it alluded to these themes, and it all sounded positive, but in terms of action, it wasn't clear what it meant. So I like the way you're connecting the dots now, and it's almost stunning, the history of this train as it's come along over decades, where now you have them basically saying it's all about density. We're going to take you off your land, because it's almost like, I don't know if you've heard of the term Malthusians, after a famous political economist who basically, well, frankly, they thought the problem to the world was we just simply have too many darn human beings. So if we can find those human beings, get rid of them, and of course, it's the good and the great, the people running the show. I mean, I think the Club of Rome years ago had a very famous pronouncement that we had hit the walls of growth and no more. But of course, in retrospect, they were all wrong. It was the analysis was hooey. But I guess what I'm just saying, what's going on here? What's the attitude that's driving this kind of agenda? You must have some thesis or theory on that, Maggie Hope Braun. Like, what's going on here?
Well, they've certainly played up the climate change narrative in all of this. So that's one of the key rationales for pushing programs like net zero programs, which are behind the drive behind all of this in our cities and towns.
So getting rid of can you explain to us as lay people, what is the net zero program? What does that mean to us?
Yeah, so they're looking at the net zero program. So one of the main ones that we are addressing is the Partners for Climate Protection program. It's funded by the federal government and the Green Municipal Fund, and administered by the FCM and in partnership with ICLEI. And this is a 5 milestone framework. We actually see it being duplicated in many other programs and communities through consultants and NGOs. So, but it's essentially the same 5 milestones. So milestone 1 is a very extensive data collection that goes well beyond what most communities are normally tasked with, looking at their municipal buildings and seeing how much energy they're using and trying to be a bit more energy efficient. That makes sense. But what this program does is it looks at all of our energy and waste from both the municipality and the community, right down to livestock counts, what's coming out of our garbage bins, doing waste audits, looking at the methane potential of everything.
Wait a second. What are you talking about? Just hold this sec for a second. You're saying that this program is systematically collecting all this data on virtually everything that's going on in the community, so that they can weigh it into this net zero program where they think carbon dioxide is what, a pollutant?
Yes.
Seriously?
Yes. And they've been so good at pushing this. When we look at the FCM in 1994, they put forward a 40-page document called the Municipal Primer, and it was a blueprint on how Agenda 21 would be implemented through Canadian municipalities.
Yes.
And their means of implementation was education, public awareness, training, and providing information for decision making, and then the transfer of environmentally sound technology. But they've done such a good job in their public awareness, right, and pushing this so that everyone thinks that human activity is the main cause of climate change. And they're relying on skewed studies, right? Maybe not even skewed. I don't want to give the researchers a hard time, but there's 2 main studies that have been done on the consensus, for instance. And, they'll say 98% of scientists agree that humans are responsible for climate change. And that's a tricky one to counter. But what you have to look at there is any scientist is going to acknowledge that CO2 impacts the climate. But the question is, how much CO2 are we responsible for? And is that the main cause of climate change, right? Or are there natural factors at play that are also contributing? So they don't want to talk about the natural factors, and they don't want to talk about how much CO2 we're actually contributing. And when we do those numbers, we find, 0.04% of the atmosphere is, 0.04% of CO2 is in the atmosphere. And humans are only responsible for probably less than 4% of that. And all the rest is coming from natural sources. And so they've really pushed certain narratives. And then we find other studies, right, that have been done that are a bit more accurate, where on the consensus, that show that only 0.3% of scientists would say that humans are the main cause of climate change. And then they try and bury those studies. And there's a lot going on there. But yes, of course, every scientist is going to say that we contribute something. And then they say, well, that means that 98% agree. And they push that, right? And they push that for 20 years.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's been a drumbeat. And again, it's kind of like these clever tactics where they say, if you don't agree with this, I believe it was Barack Obama, the former US president, asserted the idea that 97%, there's a consensus about global warming, that it's all created by humans, is an utter silly statement. Science doesn't work by consensus. Science works through debate. And it is critical for the sake of our society that we honor that scientific method. Otherwise, we'll just be having a group hug and we all go over the cliff together because we all think, well, there's a consensus. No, that's not how science works. So we've got a lot of comments here, Maggie. Don't follow Bill Gates. Caesar Time says, don't follow Bill Gates science or the WEF or and WHO. We are doomed. We will own nothing and be happy. I think they're paraphrasing a famous statement. I think that was it Klaus Schwab who said that, Maggie?
Yes. Yes, it
Trying to
was.
remember that.
Yeah.
So we have a situation here where you're not buying the globalist narrative and set of policies. And so that's a key point, right? We've got to really look at these policies critically. And I want to add something. Maggie Hope Braun, you're an ecologist, is that right?
I took ecosystem management in college, and that's where I learned how to write reports and do studies and gather information and think critically. I was able to take geology there and a bunch of other courses in fish and wildlife and everything else, and just a great course altogether. So yeah, after the lockdowns and this wonderful network of solution-minded people have come together, I just thought, well, this is my contribution. I'm going to,
Wow.
put these skills to work. And after 12 years of just homeschooling my kids and working on community projects and community gardens, I thought I can do something. I can do something about these issues that we're facing now.
Yeah. But it's fascinating because you care, and I mean, obviously, I know you. You care deeply about the environment. You care deeply about the community, among other things. And this is why you're engaged. And you look at this, say, this is hooey. This is actually destroying people's lives. So wake up, people. That's kind of your part of your story, isn't it? It's quite moving, actually.
Absolutely.
We're getting all these comments. It's an MJ Daggett says pollution is created by humans. Pollution isn't climate change. Climate has been changing in and out of cycles since day one.
Yep.
Well
Yeah,
said.
that's a big thing. We see, Trudeau coming out and saying we're putting a tax on pollution. And any scientist should know that CO2 is not a pollutant, right? There's a difference between pollution, which actually negatively impacts our health and our environment, and CO2, which is actually plant food and a building block of life and has many benefits for agriculture and everything else. So, yeah.
So before
There's
we
a
get through some examples, I want to share a question here, Maggie. It's I believe it's Amhola, pardon my pronunciation. Is Canada too far gone? It seems hopeless at times since doesn't seem the Liberal government cares at all anymore for the law. The law becomes a tool, maybe a weapon. Maybe I don't mean to misread that, but I guess the question is it too late to act, Maggie? Do they have us surrounded?
So, I think Canada has gone too far, but in a sense, that is our opportunity now to push the pendulum back, right? They've overstepped the line so far with in so many areas. So, the federal government and international organizations have stepped right over the line of Section 98 of the Section 92 of the Canadian Constitution and bypassed the provinces to access the municipalities. And so the federal government isn't supposed to have really anything to do with our municipalities at all. And here we are finding, international programs funded by the federal government taking over the municipal agenda. The municipal mandate for councils and local governments has about 10 different responsibilities that they oversee. So zoning and housing availability, economic development, local programs, public safety. There's a whole host of about 10 different things that they are supposed to oversee. And through these programs, they have taken over the entire agenda, diverted funding and administration from all of those local mandates, and started to direct all of our local funds and administrative capacity towards the implementation of global agendas. So we're just bringing common sense back in. And I think because why ICLEI, this strategy is working is because for too long, Canadians haven't been looking at what's happening at the local level. Those of us that have been concerned keep looking at the higher level stuff that's happening. But once we turn our attention to what's happening locally and we start to actually focus in on what we can do about that, we are instantly winning. There has not been one example of us going into a local council and it not having a positive impact in bringing awareness to them. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. Sometimes it's the council is not receptive, but the local press is when we do press releases. And we're just finding that this is working. It might be discouraging at first, but it's working.
Congratulations. So there is the answer to the question before. Yes, there is hope. And darn it, there's people winning, including Maggie Hope Braun. So that is very exciting. Carrie Jepson says a very interesting question. Maggie, what specific question would I put forward to my mayor to determine that our council is involved in these programs like these that you talked about? That's a good question.
That's a very good question. So you would want to ask if they are, or find out if they're a member of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. That would be a good one. Ask what programs they may have adopted from the FCM. Ask what, look to see if you have a climate action plan in your community, that if you do, then you're working through the 5 milestones of the program. We only discussed milestone 1, the data collection, but 2 is setting reduction targets. Does your community have reduction targets in place, and how much money are they spending on the climate action plan? And just starting that conversation. And the ICLEI approach is very professional in our communications with our local councils. So we make sure we're promoting the idea of editing every communication that you send to your council from henceforth. No, they we want to provide them with information and recommendations and ask questions to gather that information so we can back it up at the end of the day and show them that they are connected to ICLEI, because many of them don't know who ICLEI is. And that in itself is a big red flag when we go in and we say, you've signed up for a program with ICLEI, and they're like, we're not connected with ICLEI. But then we show them, no, you've adopted the program, you are connected with ICLEI. And why is it you don't know what this organization is? That's their due diligence, is to know what they've signed up for and who they've partnered with, right? So gathering information, and that's a good approach. And people can always email me at info@kickley.ca if they would like help drafting communications with their councils about specific issues. And it doesn't take me long to kind of get that information back to everyone.
Wow, good for you. So I like the way you're also framing up this policy issue and action, Maggie, in the sense that it's not quite all black and white, in the sense that there's a lot of good people involved at the local level, but some of them are being misled. Some maybe don't know the facts, so to speak, to put it politely. They may be naive. There's a lot of good people at the local level, but it behooves us as citizens to ask those good questions and to be able to research and see what the policies are and get involved appropriately. And I encourage people to look at ICLEI's website. And we keep getting a lot of comments. And again, I'm talking to Maggie Hope Braun with a citizens action organization. Make sure you look at their website. There's a good number of resources as well. I also encourage you to look at the Frontier Center website, because to put it bluntly, there's a lot of good public policy issues that we talk about that are spot on here. And I'll give you one example, because Maggie, you mentioned about the challenge of the federal government not sticking in its constitutional lane.
Mm.
constantly dipping into provincial issues, let alone local ones. I mean, the local government is the responsibility of each province. And so consistently, you look at a pattern. I would say part of the answer to the question that was just asked earlier, what are the signs of a municipality that's kind of gone sideways and not tending to the potholes and other
Mhm.
things? Um, is are they getting federal funding for some program? That's usually a sign that
Yeah.
something they're buying into something that is being influenced by federal policy. And so is that a fair comment, Maggie? It's kind of pathetic, isn't it? That anybody
Yeah.
who's getting federal funding, you beware, wake up. That's a red flag.
It is so unfortunate. So, in order for a municipal government to get federal funding, they have to sign up. Well, I shouldn't say they have to sign up. They can do it without signing up. They could write their own grants, applications, and so on. But it's all through the Green Municipal Fund. There is no other municipal
That's it.
fund federally except for the Green
Mhm.
Municipal Fund. So they
Right.
essentially adopt these programs that are aligned with an international agenda in order to get
Mhm.
funding. And that's a
Exactly.
serious problem.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those are huge red flags. So pay
Mhm.
attention. So I think we're onto something. It's almost like we need to do that deep dive on research that would expose those kinds of cities. In fact, we just had a comment here. Gosh, there's so many great comments from the audience here.
I'll just say
Um,
Tanya, who is the comment on the screen, she is in Prince
mhm.
Edward County, and we spoke together at a presentation to her county on Tuesday night.
Nice.
And so
So
this is,
tell us the story. What's going on in Prince Edward County is one example on beautiful Lake Ontario there just by Kingston.
yeah, it's a beautiful rural community. I think that
Mm,
they have 25,000 residents, 100
mhm,
hectares of rural agricultural land in a few small towns. And they've
mhm.
adopted the Partners for Climate Protection program in 2001. They've
In
done
2001, they adopted it.
2021. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say it's
And
21.
and the council wasn't overly receptive to our presentation, but it was our first time. We didn't do a lot of pre-engagement with them, which I do recommend
Mhm,
that we send them
mhm.
reports ahead of time. We start to prime them with some information before we come in so that they're ready and have some questions. But what was great about that is we we were able to follow up with the council after, and despite the council not being really receptive to our recommendations,
Mhm.
the media was actually on it the next day, and we had issued press releases and everything, and they printed it word for word for us. And that goes to show the importance of doing press releases, but also sticking to the facts and dropping any rhetoric. We don't need to make this a big conspiracy. At the end of the day,
Yeah.
the council adopted a program. They said
Mhm,
it was environmental stewardship. It looks like a massive data collection project that is in a community that, when we actually do the breakdown of what that community puts out emissions wise, um, we find, and what the community is absorbing through its agricultural soil and forests, the necessity for this net zero program just isn't there. It's not practical for the community to proceed with it, and let's divert those funds to local environmental stewardship initiatives, of which there are many that could use the funding.
mhm.
Yep.
Okay, so this is a great case study. I mean, there's so many examples.
Mhm.
You've got Peterborough, Thorold, Ontario, Tiny Township,
Mhm.
Renfrew County in Ontario, Winnipeg, Brandon, Edmonton, Wheatland County, and Stetter, Alberta, just to name a few. They all have their unique story, and I'm
Mhm.
so impressed by them. So in this case, um, in Prince Edward County, that you just mentioned. So how do you explain to a citizen why they should care? Like, how does this impact them specifically in their day-to-day lives? Like, is that not part of the challenges to say why you should care?
Yeah, I think that they should care because in Canada, we're already paying federally for carbon tax. We're already paying provincially for carbon tax. What these programs are doing is taking over the local agenda and diverting our funding at that level to more more climate reduction, CO2 reduction programs. And so why should they care? While their property taxes are going up, their local council is approving recommendations to say buy and replace their entire municipal fleet with electric vehicles, which most people can't afford, just a regular vehicle, let alone purchasing an EV vehicle. So why should our municipalities be spending replacing perfectly fine vehicles with EV vehicles and fleets? And along with that comes the expenses of EV charging stations. So property taxes are going up while the municipal council is approving building retrofits for their municipal buildings or knocking down their buildings and building a completely new one. So we're having a housing crisis, and they're building completely new buildings and facilities to run their operations. The active transportation networks are seeing lawsuits in places like Montreal, where they're finding when they put the bike lanes in, they're restricting access to small businesses and local residents. And there's liabilities and risks that come along with adopting this. In Huntsville, they brought in electric school buses, and we just saw pictures circulated everywhere of these school buses completely burnt out. Once those buses, an electric vehicle sets on fire, the firefighters have no way of putting it out. And these are things that councils need to take into consideration when they accept these recommendations. And the recommendations won't stop. When we get to 2050, and when they've reduced all the emissions and energy that they possibly can from the community, there's residual emissions. And at that point, more technology is brought in. So the CO2 intake plants and so on. So it's an endless stream of capital expenditures. And for what? Prince Edward County, 25,000 people. When we do the calculation, they're emitting 0.00000, maybe I added one more zero than necessary, 5% of CO2 into the atmosphere. And we're already at net zero. And the problem with net zero programs is they don't take into account any of our pre-existing carbon sinks. So not one of our trees that exists in that county is taken into account when this program is adopted. It counts if you add a tree, but they don't.
You gotta be kidding, Maggie.
No.
So I gotta just stop you there. So that's a huge shtick. I mean, they're not even following their own twisted methodology of science. Those are my words. Of carbon sinks, or the whole idea is that trees obviously do what? Oh yeah, they use carbon dioxide to grow, and they take that into account. Like seriously, this is just all one-way street to driving people's costs up, making people's lives miserable, and driving them into poverty. Am I on line here?
You're absolutely on point. So we've boiled down our main counter report. So each province now, we look at their municipal act. Okay, the council has a duty to represent the public and consider the best interests of the municipality, something like that. They've sworn an oath to do this. It's the council's job, and the council's job alone, to assess and approve these programs. Council, the staff and consultants, they can make recommendations, but it's the council whose duty it is to do this. And then we look at the legal context and we say, okay, internationally, federally, and provincially, are the municipalities being forced to do this? No, they're doing it all voluntarily. So anytime a resident looks at their local agenda and they see something that is related to net zero or anything related to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, start highlighting it. All of that is being done voluntarily, and we can help them to stop doing that. So then what we do is we do a cost analysis. So I've done a very conservative estimate. The program, like the Partners for Climate Protection program, is presented as a free program, free to participate.
Free in quotes.
And so we show them there's no way that milestone 1 through 5 is free, and all the recommendations coming after it. It costs money to redo your electric fleet and put in charging stations and do bike lanes. So I put together a very conservative estimate on that, to show them that it costs money, right? You can't say it's free to participate. And we're doing recommendations that they do a cost analysis on the program. That is their duty. And then we do a breakdown for each province. So based on the population, how much is the population emitting of CO2? Because that's what this is all about, right? And then we look at their ecosystems. And this is where my ecosystem management training comes in. And each ecosystem has a certain capacity to absorb CO2. And we get the hectares and the of each ecosystem. So forests, peatlands, wetlands, agriculture, there's a whole bunch. And we do the calculation and we show them in each provincial report that they're absorbing far more CO2 than they put out, making these programs unnecessary.
Wow.
And then
is crazy land. I tell you, I look at the comments and it's so fascinating how people are just resonating with what you're talking about. Like just the wheels are turning.
Good.
We've got comments around there was a comment before about, this is a pathway to deindustrializing our society.
Yeah.
And there was a kind of almost a half flippant comment up there, and I apologize, I can't quite find it now. It says, you are the carbon that they want to eliminate, like as in you as a human being.
Yeah.
That gets to my earlier Malthusian comment. The Malthusians were essentially, they don't like humans. So anyways, this is very interesting. And meanwhile, you don't get it. We're the carbon and they want to get rid of it. Yeah. So anyways, thank you very much.
It feels that way. It sometimes feels that way.
Yeah, no, so this is very interesting because you're giving us hope, Maggie, in the sense that we can mobilize as citizens and work with our dear fellow citizens at the local level and say, stop it, open your eyes and wake up. So what kind of response do you usually get from local municipalities? Is it kind of a mixed bag where people say, how dare you ask us? Or do they do ad hominem attacks by saying, well, you've got tinfoil hats on? Or how do they respond to your how dare you question, to paraphrase Greta Thunberg?
So I would say we absolutely get everything you just stated. We're up against ICLEI and their affiliates and the media, and they're well funded. They have action groups like Council for Canadians.
They're well funded by who? By who, Maggie?
Well, ICLEI itself is funded in part by Google, which is backed by BlackRock and all of them. The Council of Canadians, I'm not sure exactly how they get all of their funding, but they're doing what we're doing, but opposite. They're gathering signatures for the climate action plan. We're gathering signatures to oppose it, right? So they have, I think, $3 to $6 million in their annual budget, right? And there's hundreds of those organizations out there pushing this, but they don't have but they're using trickery to get councils to adopt this, right? They're using joining resolutions for programs that are leaving out a lot of important information about the cost and liability of the programs. This is ICLEI's, thank you for putting that up, because it goes back to, the network that we're establishing across Canada and the importance of it. If you look down on the last sentence, it says that ICLEI is a network of members. They've changed this a bit. Used to say a network of members and experts working together through peer exchange and partnership to create systematic change. And that's what I'm proposing. And I think a lot of people like us are proposing as well, as we need to shore up our network of members and experts to resist it. And what ICLEI recently did, we can take that one down for a moment. Thank you. What ICLEI recently did, we sent an open letter to ICLEI through the KICLEI Substack, and that goes to elected representatives across Canada from the local level all the way up to the Senate. When I press send on the KICLEI Substack, it it's going places. So our open letter to ICLEI really hit a nerve. They published within a week a webpage about misinformation. And they alluded to well-orchestrated networks that are spreading misinformation and undermining climate policy related to the Paris Accord, which is great.
How dare you?
Yeah.
How dare you, Maggie?
And I just thought, here is an organization funded by Google, which acknowledges that it's a network that is driving change, systematic change in our society. And they are offended when ordinary citizens of a country or a community get together and have questions and raise concerns about what they're doing. Right. It was, so I've done since that time a misinformation page on ICLEI's Substack just to document all of this and the irony and the hypocrisy of it. So
isn't that pathetic? So this is an interesting comment just to kind of dovetails here. Gary says they hide the truth and it's up to us to bring the truth out. Exactly, Gary. So part of this concept here that I find so frankly despicable is not only are you handing out public policy and when it's real kind of bizarre ideology masquerading as good public policy, that's point number one. Number two, they do it under the cover of darkness. These people love the black boxes. And how dare you as a citizen get involved and want to be involved in terms of transparency and accountability, which are primary principles for any democracy. And that's the punchline. These are authoritarians moving in because they don't believe in democracy. They want to jump over it and go right to the implementation and sideline the people. Isn't that the conclusion here, Maggie?
Absolutely.
Am I being brutal?
And what's beautiful about doing this at the local level is we get to be in the same room as our decision makers. We get to go in and we get to speak to them and read their body language. We get to see who on council is pushing this program. And what we're finding is there's a lot of bullies. There's a couple bullies on their council that will push back on us. And our job is to stand in our truth, present the facts out of concern, not because we're afraid of what they're doing. We're not because we're, have a tinfoil hat on and are going to try and download as many conspiracy theories as possible into the local council. No, we're going to just bring them the information, put it in front of them and see what they do with it. And I believe that truth wins every time. So if we have a code of conduct on the ICLEI website, a certain approach to council that does win. And when we go in there and the difference between our approach and the bullies on council or within the community that are going to pop up and try and defend these programs, the difference in the public eye will be so evident, right? And people will come to our side when we do it this way. And that's what we need. We need the masses of Canadians to get behind us and not behind that agenda.
Right on. So as we finish off our conversation today, Maggie, it's been an inspiring one, a far-reaching one. I'm really grateful for our audience. Great questions and comments. It's just been very good energy here. But I will tell you this. Do you see signs of hope across our world as we look at, for example, changes in the U.S. administration, pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord, frankly, defunding all this junk science going on? Do you see signs of hope?
Absolutely. I think that we've already gone over the hump. We've pushed through. We're over the hump, and really, we're on the winning side of all of this. In the United States, my thoughts on them pulling out of the Paris Accord are that they can do that at the federal level. And that is great. We want to see that happen here. But even if they do that at the federal level in the United States, they still have organizations like ICLEI influencing their local governments. So in Tennessee and a handful of other states, they have passed resolutions to prevent their municipalities from partnering with ICLEI. So that's what I would say moving forward. Make sure, if you really want to stop
Mm,
this, because it is a global to local agenda.
mm,
That's what Agenda 21 is. It is a global
yeah,
to local
right on.
council agenda. Then they need to keep going with those resolutions here in Ontario for the uh, election coming up. We're going to put forward a resolution for Ontario to do something similar. And we want to make
Brilliant.
that part of the debate, right? We need to have that discussion.
That's great. So you're seeing signs of hopes, and I like the way you're thinking, Maggie, that you're recognizing that this is a multi um, government approach here, not just at the local level, but the provinces, the premiers need to get off their backsides and legislate and say, you know what, let's keep local government focused on local government with local citizens
Mhm.
and do the basics well. Like, gosh, you drive around so many communities in this country, it's pathetic the amount of potholes and all
Yeah,
the rest. So this has been a delightful conversation, Maggie Smith Brown. Maggie Hope Braun, pardon me. And
yeah.
I am encouraged by our audience. I encourage you to look at Maggie's website and share this recording. This is important stuff. This matters to our lives. And so, on that note, I want to thank you for joining us today, Maggie, and wish you every success. And we'll look forward to having you back on soon again.
I'll,
And in the meantime, I wish you every success. And please join us, the audience, next week on the same time and same place on Leaders on the Frontier.
It's wonderful. And please do check out the website. There is a join us so you can be kept in the loop when things are happening in your local community. And we have a very important survey. We need to get some data in front of local councils from every community showing that the community would like them to prioritize their municipal mandate over global sustainable development goals. And that's really what we need in order to push back on this. So thank you.
Very good. So complete that survey, and that'll be great to help share those results. So in the
Mhm.
meantime, thank you so much for this discussion, everyone, and have a terrific week. And we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.